The chandelier above the dining table cast fractured light across the faces of men who had built empires on silence and blood. Don Salvatore Marconi sat at the head of the table, his thick fingers wrapped around a crystal glass of Barolo, the wine dark as the secrets buried beneath his Manhattan estate. Around him, his capos laughed too loud, their voices carrying the false warmth of men who knew that one wrong word could end with a bullet behind the ear. It was November, and outside the mansion windows the first snow of winter began to fall. Inside, the air smelled of cigar smoke, roasted lamb, and the particular tension that always preceded violence or stupidity. Sometimes both. Salvatore was 53 years old, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle in the way of men who no longer needed to throw punches themselves. His hair, once black as oil, had turned silver at the temples, giving him the look of a distinguished predator. His eyes were grey and cold, the kind of eyes that never blinked first. For 30 years he had ruled the Marconi family, with an iron fist wrapped in velvet threats. Tributes flowed to him like rivers. Judges took his calls. Policemen looked the other way. Even the other families whispered his name with respect. Tonight he was bored. Boredom was dangerous for a man like Salvatore. It made him cruel in ways that even his cruelty could not usually justify. Across from him sat Tony Costello, his underboss, a lean wolf of a man with nervous hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. To Salvatore's right lounged fat Paulie Giordano, a capo whose nickname had become Prophecy, his belly straining against his silk vest. And beside Paulie sat Vincent the Knife, an enforcer whose reputation was written in the scar tissue of his knuckles and the unmarked graves scattered across 3 states. They had been drinking since sunset. The lamb was gone. The dessert had been cleared. Now they were in that dangerous hour when powerful men with too much wine began making terrible decisions. It was fat Paulie who started it. He leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning beneath his weight, and stabbed his cigar toward the kitchen door. Beyond it, in the servants' quarters, the hired help moved like ghosts, cleaning dishes and pretending not to exist. "For you ever notice how the old ones just keep hanging around?" Paulie said, his voice thick with wine and malice. "Like they're part of the furniture. You forget they're even there." Salvatore raised an eyebrow. "What old ones?" "That ancient hag who does the linens. Sophia, I think her name is. Been here, 20 years? 30. She's practically a fossil. Shuffles around like death, warmed over." Vincent the Knife laughed, a sound like gravel in a disposal. "I thought she was already dead. Saw her in the hallway last week and almost called the undertaker." Even Tony Costello, who usually had more sense, allowed himself a thin smile. Salvatore did not smile. He considered the matter with the same attention he gave to territorial disputes and murder contracts. Sophia. Yes, he knew who they meant. An old woman, somewhere past 70, her back bent like a question mark, her hands gnarled from decades of labor. She had appeared in his household so long ago that he could not remember hiring her. She simply existed, like the wallpaper or the portraits of dead ancestors watching from the walls. "She's harmless," Salvatore said, though he said it without warmth. In his world, harmless meant worthless. "Harmless, sure," Paulie agreed. "But what's the point? Why keep her around? Out of charity." He said the word charity like it was an obscenity. The table fell silent. Charity was not a virtue in their world. Charity was weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. It was Vincent who pushed it further. He leaned forward, his scarred knuckles drumming on the mahogany table. "I'll bet you couldn't do it, Don Salvatore." Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "Do what?" "Cut her loose just like that. No severance, no warning. Just throw the old bag out on the street and forget about her." Vincent's smile was ugly. "I'll bet you've gone soft. All these years of silk sheets and expensive wine, I bet you couldn't be that cold anymore." The air in the room changed. It became sharp, dangerous. Fat Paulie laughed nervously. "Vincent, you drunk bastard, you don't bet against the Don." But Salvatore raised a hand, silencing him, his grey eyes fixed on Vincent with the intensity of a man who had ordered executions for lesser insults. But beneath the anger, there was something else, that boredom, that restless cruelty rising like bile. "How much?" Salvatore asked quietly. Vincent blinked. "What? How much are you willing to bet that I've gone soft?" The table held its breath. Vincent's smile faltered, then returned, meaner. 10,000. Cash. I bet 10,000 you won't throw that old woman out tonight. Right now, in the snow. Tony Costello shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, this is stupid. It's just wine talk." But Salvatore was already standing. He drained his glass, set it down with deliberate precision, and buttoned his suit jacket. His movements were calm, controlled. That was how you knew he had made a decision. "Bring her here," he said. Nobody moved. "I said, bring her here," Salvatore repeated, his voice dropping to that register that made even hardened killers obey without question. Vincent the Knife stood, suddenly less sure of himself, and walked toward the kitchen. The others sat frozen, watching their Don with the horrified fascination of men watching a car crash in slow motion. 3 minutes later, Vincent returned with Sophia shuffling behind him. She was even older than Salvatore remembered. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each line a year of labor and loss. Her hair, thin and white, was pulled back in a bun that trembled with each step. She wore a simple black dress and an apron stained with kitchen work. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, darted around the room with the confused fear of prey suddenly dragged before predators. "Don Salvatore!" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from years of silence. In his world, servants did not speak unless spoken to. Salvatore looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. That was the moment he knew Vincent's bet was already lost. "Sophia," he said, his voice neutral, "how long have you worked for me?" She twisted her gnarled hands together. 32 years, Don Salvatore, since my Marco was a boy." Marco. The name sparked something in the distant caverns of Salvatore's memory. One of his soldiers from years ago, dead probably, or disappeared. In his world, they were the same thing. 32 years, Salvatore repeated. He walked around the table, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. "That's a long time. You must be tired." Hope flickered in her milky eyes. "I can still work, Don Salvatore. My hands are still strong enough for—" "I'm letting you go," he said. The words fell like stones into water. Sophia's mouth opened, closed. I don't understand. You're fired. Effective immediately. Collect whatever belongs to you and leave. Tonight." Fat Paulie shifted in his chair. Even he looked uncomfortable now. Tony Costello stared at his hands. "But, Don Salvatore," Sophia's voice cracked. "It's snowing outside. I have nowhere to—" "That's not my concern," Salvatore interrupted. His voice was not angry. Anger would have been more merciful. This was simply cold, final. The voice of a man swatting a fly. Tears began to run down Sophia's weathered cheeks. "Please, I served your family faithfully. I never stole, never spoke out of turn. I just need—" "You need to leave my house," Salvatore said. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a single $20 bill, and held it out to her. "Here. For your loyalty." The insult was intentional. 32 years reduced to $20. Sophia's hand trembled as she took it. She looked around the table, at the faces of the capos and enforcers, searching for mercy or sense. She found neither. These were men who had murdered for less than the cost of the wine they were drinking. "My coat," she whispered. "May I get my coat?" Salvatore waved his hand dismissively. 5 minutes. Then I want you gone." Sophia shuffled from the room, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The moment she disappeared, Vincent the Knife barked out a laugh. "Holy Christ, boss. You actually did it. You cold-blooded son of a bitch." Salvatore returned to his seat and poured himself another glass of wine. "Pay up." Vincent, still grinning, pulled out a thick envelope from his jacket and tossed it across the table. 10,000 in cash, already prepared. He had come ready to make this bet, Salvatore realized. This had been planned. That should have bothered him. Instead, he felt only satisfaction at winning. Fat Paulie laughed, the tension breaking. "Jesus, Don Salvatore, remind me never to bet against you." "Too late for that wisdom," Tony Costello muttered, but nobody heard him. They raised their glasses in a toast celebrating cruelty for sport and drank deeply. None of them noticed when, 15 minutes later, the side door of the mansion quietly closed. None of them saw the old woman, dressed in a thin coat 20 years out of style, shuffle down the stone steps into the freezing November night. None of them saw her pause at the bottom of the driveway, looking back at the mansion with its golden windows and warm light, one hand clutching the $20 bill, the other pressed against her chest as if holding her heart inside, and none of them saw what she whispered into the darkness, her breath misting in the cold air. "Marco," she said to the snow and the shadows. "Marco, my son, your time has come." Then Sophia Vitelli walked into the night and disappeared. Inside the mansion, Don Salvatore Marconi counted his winnings and laughed with his capos and felt nothing at all. He would remember that feeling later in the dark hours when the dead came calling. He would remember it and wish he had felt something, anything, when he still had the chance. but that was later. Tonight, he drank and celebrated his victory over an old woman who had nothing, and outside the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of someone who had once existed, burying her footprints like a grave being filled. The first piece had moved on the chessboard. The game had begun. Don Salvatore Marconi just didn't know he was playing yet. 3 days after Sophia Vitelli disappeared into the November snow, the first body failed to appear. It was Tommy Fingers, one of Vincent the Knife's enforcers, who went missing first. Tommy was a reliable soldier, the kind who showed up on time, did the work without questions, and kept his mouth shut. He had been sent to collect a debt from a restaurant owner in Little Italy, a simple job that should have taken an hour. When he didn't return by nightfall, Vincent assumed the kid had stopped for drinks or women. When he didn't return by morning, Vincent assumed he had gotten himself arrested or killed. When 3 more days passed with no word, no body, no arrest record, Vincent began to worry. Tommy Fingers had simply vanished. The second disappearance came 5 days later. Carlo the Butcher, one of Fat Paulie's crew, failed to show up for a meeting at the social club on Mulberry Street. Carlo was called the Butcher, not because of his trade, but because of his enthusiasm with a cleaver during interrogations. He was a man who enjoyed his work too much, which made him useful, but unstable. When he didn't appear, Paulie figured Carlo had finally snapped and fled the city, but Carlo's apartment was untouched. His car was still parked on the street. His wallet and identification sat on his dresser. The Butcher had walked out of his life wearing only the clothes on his back, leaving everything behind like a man walking into the ocean. By the time the third soldier vanished, the whispers had started. Don Salvatore Marconi heard the whispers during a meeting with his underboss in the private office on the 3rd floor of his mansion. It was December now, and outside the window, the city had transformed into a landscape of grey slush and skeletal trees. Inside, a fire crackled in the marble fireplace, but the warmth couldn't quite reach the corners of the room. Tony Costello sat across from Salvatore, his nervous hands fidgeting with a gold lighter. He was a thin man who had survived 30 years in the life by being smart enough to see trouble before it arrived. Right now, his instincts were screaming. 3 soldiers gone in 2 weeks, boss, Tony said quietly. No bodies, no demands, no word from any of the other families. It's like they walked into fog and never came out. Salvatore sipped his espresso, his face carved from stone. Soldiers disappear. It happens. They get arrested. They run. They get killed and dumped where we can't find them. Not like this, Tony insisted. Tommy Fingers was solid. Carlo was crazy but loyal. And now Frankie Shoes is gone too. 3 guys with nothing in common except they all worked for us. What are you suggesting? Tony hesitated. In their world, the wrong suggestion could be your last. The men are talking. They're saying it started after the old woman. Salvatore set down his cup with deliberate care. What old woman? Sophia, the one you fired, the one we threw out into the snow. Tony's voice dropped lower. They're saying her son was Marco Vitelli. The name hung in the air like smoke. Marco Vitelli. Salvatore's memory reached back 8 years to a soldier who had been loyal until he wasn't. Marco had been ordered to kill a rival family's consigliere, a clean hit that would have sent a message. But Marco had refused, not out loud, never directly. He had simply not done it, and when pressed, he had looked Salvatore in the eye and said, "Some lines shouldn't be crossed, even by us." That kind of defiance could not be tolerated. Salvatore had ordered Marco killed. Vincent the Knife had volunteered for the job. Marco had been invited to a meeting in a warehouse in Red Hook. He had walked in. He had never walked out, except they had never found his body. Vincent claimed he had dumped it in the river, weighted down with chains, but the river sometimes gave back its dead, and Marco had never surfaced. After a few months, everyone assumed the fish had done their work. The matter was closed, but now Salvatore wondered. Marco Vitelli has been dead for 8 years, he said flatly. Maybe, Tony replied, or maybe he's been waiting. For what? Revenge? If he wanted revenge, why wait 8 years? Tony leaned forward. Because you didn't just kill him, boss. You killed him, and then you forgot about him. You forgot about his mother, too. For 8 years, she scrubbed your floors and washed your sheets, invisible, harmless, and then you threw her out into the snow for a bet, for a joke. Salvatore's jaw tightened. Are you saying I made a mistake? I'm saying that men who feel forgotten become dangerous. And if Marco Vitelli is alive, if he's been watching and waiting all these years, then throwing out his mother might have been the spark that lit the fuse. "This is superstition," Salvatore snapped. "Ghost stories. The men are spooked because of bad luck and coincidence." "Then where are the bodies?" Tony asked. "If this is another family moving against us, they'd want us to find the bodies. That's the message. But there are no bodies, no messages, nothing. Just empty spaces where our soldiers used to be." Before Salvatore could respond, the office door opened. Fat Paulie stood in the doorway, his face pale beneath the flush of broken capillaries. He was breathing hard, as if he had climbed the stairs too fast. "Boss!" Paulie wheezed. "You need to see this." They followed him down to the mansion's wine cellar, a vaulted stone chamber that held bottles worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. The air was cool and smelled of oak and earth. At the far end of the cellar, written on the wall in what looked like dried blood, were 4 words. "The debt comes due." Salvatore stared at the message. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, something cold began to coil in his chest. "Who has access to this cellar?" he demanded. "Only family," Paulie said. "Only us. The door was locked from the inside. Nobody could have gotten in without a key." Tony Costello stepped closer to the wall, studying the letters. "This isn't fresh blood. It's old. Days old, maybe more. Whoever wrote this did it a while ago, and we're only finding it now." "Impossible," Salvatore said. "This cellar is checked every day. Someone would have seen it." But even as he said it, he remembered the nature of ghosts. They appeared when they wanted to be seen. Fat Paulie rubbed his face with trembling hands. "Boss, the men are terrified. They think we're cursed. They think that old woman put the evil eye on us before she left." "Our curses aren't real," Salvatore said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tony was silent, his eyes fixed on the bloody words. Finally he spoke. "Whether curses are real or not doesn't matter. What matters is that someone wants us to believe they are, and that someone knows enough about us to get inside our locked cellars and make our soldiers disappear without a trace." "Then find them," Salvatore ordered. "Put every man on the street. Shake down every informant. Someone knows something." But even as he gave the order, he felt the weight of futility. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you threaten someone who doesn't fear death? That night, Salvatore stood alone in his bedroom on the 3rd floor of his mansion. The room was decorated in dark woods and heavy fabrics, a sanctuary of power and wealth. He poured himself a scotch and stood by the window, looking out at the winter city below. Somewhere in that city, 3 of his soldiers had vanished. Somewhere in that city, a message had been written in blood, and somewhere in that city, an old woman he had thrown away like garbage had walked into the snow and disappeared. For the first time in 30 years, Don Salvatore Marconi felt something he had not felt since he was a young soldier learning the life. He felt afraid. The fear was small, barely a whisper, but it was there. It lived in the space between heartbeats, in the moment before sleep, when the mind is most vulnerable. He drank his scotch and tried to convince himself it was nothing, but in the reflection of the window glass, he thought he saw a figure standing behind him, an old woman with bent shoulders and white hair, watching him with milky eyes. He spun around. The room was empty. Salvatore cursed himself for foolishness and poured another drink. Outside, the December wind howled against the mansion walls. Inside, the fire in the bedroom hearth flickered and danced, casting shadows that moved with a life of their own. And in a basement room in a forgotten part of Brooklyn, an old woman sat in a wooden chair, her gnarled hands folded in her lap. Around her stood 4 men, their faces hidden by the darkness. She did not speak. She did not need to. The men knew what to do. One of them stepped forward and knelt before her. He was tall and lean, with dark hair going grey at the temples. His eyes were the same grey as winter ice, and across his throat ran a thick white scar where someone had once tried to cut his life away. "Mama," Marco Vitelli said softly, "it's time for the next one." Sophia reached out with one trembling hand and touched her son's scarred throat. Her fingers were cold as snow. "The underboss," she whispered. "He saw the truth but did nothing. Take him." Marco nodded once, kissed his mother's hand, and disappeared back into the darkness. The hunt continued, and in his mansion of marble and gold, Don Salvatore Marconi stood by his window and wondered why the scotch no longer warmed him. The answer, had he known it, was simple. You cannot warm yourself at a fire when winter has already found its way inside your bones, and the winter that had come for the Marconi family would not end until every debt was paid in full. Tony Costello disappeared on a Tuesday morning in mid-December. He had left his apartment at dawn to meet with a contact near the waterfront, A routine meeting that should have taken less than an hour. His wife, Maria, watched him from the bedroom window as he climbed into his black Mercedes and drove away. She would later tell the police and then the family that he had kissed her goodbye and promised to be home for dinner. He never came home. By evening, when Tony's phone went to voicemail for the 20th time, Maria called the mansion. By midnight, every soldier in the Marconi family was searching the city. By dawn, they had found his car parked near an abandoned pier in Red Hook, the keys still in the ignition, the driver's door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, no body. Tony Costello had simply ceased to exist. When the news reached Don Salvatore, he was in his office reviewing ledgers, trying to maintain the fiction that business continued as normal. He set down his pen with slow precision and looked at Vincent the Knife, who had delivered the news with the expression of a man watching his own execution approach. 4 soldiers, and now my underboss, Salvatore said quietly. In 3 weeks. Vincent nodded. He had lost weight recently, his face gaunt and hollow. Fear had a way of eating men from the inside. The crew is falling apart, boss. Half of them want to go to war, but they don't know who to fight. The other half want to run. Nobody runs, Salvatore said. Nobody leaves until I say so. We're a family, we stand together. But even as he spoke the words, he heard their hollowness. Family was built on loyalty, and loyalty required trust. Right now, every man in the organization looked at his brothers with suspicion, wondering who would vanish next, wondering if the man beside him might be the ghost they were hunting. What about the other families? Salvatore asked. The Calabrases, the Russians? Everyone denies involvement, Vincent replied, and I believe them. This doesn't feel like a family war. It feels like something else. Something else. That was the problem. You could fight men. You could negotiate with men. But how did you fight shadows? How did you negotiate with ghosts? Salvatore stood and walked to the window. Outside, the December afternoon was dying into an early dusk. The mansion grounds were covered in dirty snow, and beyond the iron gates the city sprawled like a living thing, indifferent to his fear. Call everyone in, Salvatore said. All the capos, all the soldiers we have left. We're having a meeting tonight. Here, everyone under one roof. Vincent frowned. Boss, is that wise? If someone is picking us off one by one, putting everyone together, is exactly what we're going to do. Salvatore interrupted. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of fear. If we're going to gather, we're going to eat, and we're going to show whoever is watching that the Marconi family does not break. It was the kind of decision that came from pride rather than wisdom, but pride was all Salvatore had left. That evening, the mansion's grand dining hall filled with the men of the Marconi family. Long tables had been set with white linens and silver, candelabras burning with tall white candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The room should have felt warm, alive. Instead, it felt like a wake. 30 men gathered around the tables. Once, the Marconi family could have filled this room twice over. Now, with the disappearances and the defections, this was all that remained. They sat in their expensive suits and gold watches, these men who had built empires on violence, and they looked like children afraid of the dark. Salvatore sat at the head of the table, Fat Paulie to his right, Vincent the Knife to his left. The chair where Tony Costello should have sat remained empty, a ghost at the feast. Brothers, Salvatore began, standing with his wineglass raised, we are going through a difficult time. We've lost men, good men, loyal men, but we are not broken. We are the Marconi family. We have survived wars, investigations, betrayals. We will survive this too. The men raised their glasses without enthusiasm and drank. Salvatore continued, whoever is moving against us wants us to be afraid. They want us to turn on each other, to scatter like rats. But we won't give them that satisfaction. Tonight, we eat together, we drink together, we stand together, and we send a message that we are not afraid. It was a good speech, the kind that might have inspired courage in another time, in another circumstance. But tonight the words fell flat. The men ate their pasta and their roasted chicken, but they tasted nothing. They drank their wine, but it brought no warmth. And as the meal progressed, something began to happen. It started with Fat Paulie. He had been drinking heavily, trying to drown his fear in Chianti, when suddenly he lurched forward, his face turning grey. He clutched at his throat, his eyes bulging. Paulie? Vincent grabbed his arm. What's wrong? Paulie tried to speak but only managed a gurgling sound. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. Then he pitched forward, his face hitting his plate with a wet thud. The room erupted in chaos. 2 more men collapsed within seconds, their bodies convulsing. Then 3 more, then 5. Men stumbled away from the table, knocking over chairs, shouting for help, clawing at their throats. Salvatore stood frozen, watching his family destroy itself. The wine. Someone had poisoned the wine. But not all the wine. Some men were fine, standing in shock as their brothers writhed on the floor. Others were dying, their faces turning purple, their limbs jerking like puppet strings being cut. Salvatore looked at his own glass. He had drunk from it. Why wasn't he dying? Vincent grabbed his shoulder. "Boss, we need to get you out of here." But Salvatore couldn't move. He could only watch as Fat Paulie stopped convulsing and went still, his open eyes staring at nothing, as young Frankie the driver choked out his last breath. As men who had killed without hesitation died like poisoned rats at a feast. In the end, 7 men lay dead. 7 more were rushed to the hospital, fighting for their lives. And the survivors, those who had drunk from different bottles or had been too afraid to drink at all, fled the mansion like it was cursed ground. The authorities would call it food poisoning. The newspapers would call it a tragic accident. But everyone who had been there knew the truth. Someone had walked into the mansion. Someone had poisoned specific bottles of wine. And someone had watched, perhaps from the shadows, as the Marconi family tore itself apart. Later that night, after the bodies had been removed and the police had asked their useless questions, Salvatore sat alone in his office. The house was empty now. Even his personal guards had found reasons to be elsewhere. He poured himself a scotch from a bottle he had opened himself, watched himself pour, watched himself drink. Trust nothing. Trust no one. A knock on the door made him reach for the gun in his desk drawer. "Who is it?" "It's me, boss." Vincent the Knife entered, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. He closed the door and locked it behind him. 7 dead, Vincent said, and we still don't know how they did it. The kitchen staff claims no one strange came through. The wine bottles were from our private stock, locked in the cellar, but somehow someone got to them. Salvatore took a long drink. "You were right, Vincent. I should never have thrown her out. I should have treated her with respect, paid her well, let her die in peace in some nursing home." "Sophia," Vincent said quietly. "Sophia," Salvatore agreed. "And her son, Marco Vitelli. He's alive, isn't he?" Vincent sat down heavily. "I think so, yes. I think he's been alive this whole time, waiting, and now he's come to collect. Why, what does he want? If he wanted me dead, he could have poisoned my wine too. That's the thing, boss. I don't think he wants you dead. Not yet. I think he wants you to suffer. He wants you to watch your family fall apart. He wants you to lose everything, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And then, when you're completely alone, then he'll come for you." It was a horrifying thought, made more horrifying by its truth. This wasn't a war, this was a dismantling. This was revenge, slow and surgical, and utterly without mercy. Salvatore looked at Vincent, really looked at him, and saw fear naked in the enforcer's eyes. "What about you? Why are you still here?" Vincent laughed, a bitter sound. "Where else would I go? I'm a dead man walking, boss. We all are. The only question is when." They sat in silence, 2 men who had built their lives on violence, now trapped in the machinery of their own making. Finally, Salvatore spoke. "I need to know something, Vincent. When you killed Marco Vitelli 8 years ago, did you really kill him?" Vincent met his eyes. The silence stretched. "I shot him," Vincent said finally. "I put 2 bullets in his chest. I watched him fall. But then his mother appeared out of nowhere, this old woman screaming at me. I panicked. I left. When I came back an hour later to dump the body, it was gone. I told myself maybe he had crawled to the river and drowned. I told myself the current took him. But the truth is, I don't know. I never knew. You lied to me. I did what I had to do to survive," Vincent said simply. "Same as you, same as all of us." Salvatore should have been angry. He should have killed Vincent right there for the lie. But he was too tired, too hollowed out by fear. "Get out," he said instead. "Go home. Lock your doors. Pray to whatever God you still believe in." Vincent stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, boss, I'm sorry. About the bet, about the old woman, about all of it." "Sorry doesn't bring back the dead," Salvatore replied. "No," Vincent agreed. "It doesn't." After Vincent left, Salvatore sat alone in the darkness of his office. The mansion, once filled with the sounds of life and power, now felt like a tomb. Empty rooms, empty halls, empty chairs at empty tables. He thought about Sophia, shuffling through these halls for 32 years, invisible and silent. He thought about Marco, bleeding out on a warehouse floor, abandoned by the men who had sworn brotherhood. He thought about all the people he had used and discarded in his climb to power, all the lives he had treated as disposable. For the first time in his life, Don Salvatore Marconi understood what it meant to be powerless. And in a basement room across the city, Sophia Vitelli sat in her wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap. Marco stood before her, blood on his shirt, exhaustion in his eyes. "It's done, Mama," he said. "The feast is finished." Sophia nodded slowly. "Good. Now comes the final act. Now comes the reckoning." "Are you sure you want to be there?" Marco asked. "You don't have to see it. You can rest. You've earned your rest." But Sophia shook her head. "I need to be there. I need him to see my face. I need him to know in his last moments that the woman he threw away was the beginning of his end." Marco knelt before his mother and took her cold hands in his. "Then we'll finish it together. For Papa. For all of us he hurt. For all of them," Sophia agreed. Outside, the December wind howled. Inside, mother and son prepared for the final act of a tragedy 8 years in the making. The feast was over. Now came the famine. In the days following the poisoned feast, the Marconi mansion became a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the grounds day and night. Security cameras were installed in every hallway. Food was prepared by Salvatore himself, or not eaten at all. The house that had once been a symbol of power and wealth now felt like a prison, its marble halls echoing with paranoia and dread. But the most dangerous enemy was already inside. Her name was Isabella Marconi, and she had been Don Salvatore's wife for 28 years. She was 50 years old, still beautiful in the way of women who had been stunning in their youth and refused to surrender to time without a fight. Her dark hair, shot through with elegant silver streaks, was always perfectly styled. Her clothes were expensive and tasteful. Her jewelry was real. Everything about Isabella spoke of refinement and class, but her eyes told a different story. They were dark brown, almost black, and in them lived decades of accumulated rage. Isabella had married Salvatore when she was 22, a beautiful girl from a respectable family who had been dazzled by the dangerous charisma of a young mobster on the rise. In the beginning, there had been love or something like it, but love had curdled over the years into something bitter and poisonous. She had given Salvatore 2 children, a son, Michael, who had died in a car accident at 19, drunk and racing through the city streets, his father's recklessness living in his blood, and a daughter, Lucia, who had fled to Europe 10 years ago and never returned, unable to bear the weight of the Marconi name. Isabella had buried her son and lost her daughter, and through it all, Salvatore had remained the same, cold, distant, more married to his power than to her. She had endured his mistresses. She had smiled at family gatherings while women half her age sat in her husband's lap. She had played the role of the dignified mob wife, never complaining, never causing scenes. Because that was what wives did in this world. They endured. But endurance had a breaking point, and the night Salvatore had thrown Sophia Vitelli into the snow for the amusement of his capos, something inside Isabella had finally snapped. She had watched from the upstairs window as the old woman shuffled down the driveway into the winter darkness. She had seen the cruelty in her husband's laughter as he counted his winnings, and she had made a decision. If Salvatore could discard a woman who had served him faithfully for 32 years, then Isabella knew she was not safe either. When you were no longer useful, you were discarded. That was the law of his world. So Isabella had begun to plan. She was not like Sophia, powerless and alone. She knew secrets. She knew where bodies were buried, both literally and figuratively. She knew bank account numbers and the names of corrupted officials. She knew every weakness in the Marconi empire because she had lived inside it for nearly 3 decades. And most importantly, she knew how to be invisible. Men like Salvatore never saw their wives as threats. Women were decorations, property, background furniture. That blindness was her greatest weapon. The morning after the poisoned feast, Isabella brought her husband breakfast in his office. She did this every morning now, a gesture of wifely devotion in these troubled times. She set the tray on his desk with a smile. "You didn't sleep," she observed, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "How could I sleep?" Salvatore replied. He looked older, diminished. Fear was eating him from the inside. 7 men dead, Tony gone, the family falling apart. "And I still don't know who's doing this." Isabella poured his coffee with steady hands. "Perhaps it's time to consider leaving the city. We could go to the house in Florida, wait for this to blow over. Run? Salvatore's voice hardened. The Don doesn't run. I built this empire. I won't let some ghost tear it down. Your pride will get you killed, Isabella said softly. Better than living as a coward. She said nothing more, just watched as he drank his coffee. She had been adding small amounts of oleander extract to his food for the past week. Not enough to kill, not yet. Just enough to weaken him, to fog his mind, to make his hands tremble and his judgment fail. Salvatore set down his cup and rubbed his temples. My head has been pounding for days. Must be the stress. You should see a doctor, Isabella suggested, knowing he wouldn't. Men like Salvatore didn't admit weakness. I'll be fine. He stood, swayed slightly, then steadied himself on the desk. I need to meet with what's left of the crew. We need to make plans. Of course, Isabella said. She collected the tray and turned to leave. Isabella, she paused at the door. Yes. Have you seen anything strange? Anyone who shouldn't be here? She met his eyes without flinching. No, nothing. It was a lie, smooth and perfect, because 3 nights ago she had met with Marco Vitelli in a church on the outskirts of the city. It had been surprisingly easy to make contact. She had simply left a note in Sophia's old room taped to the mirror. An address, a time, a simple message, I want to help. Marco had been suspicious at first, sitting in the shadowed pew with his grey eyes watching her like a wolf watching prey. But Isabella had brought proof of her sincerity. She had brought documents detailing Salvatore's offshore accounts, his safe house locations, his scheduled movements. Why? Marco had asked. Why betray him now? Because he threw away a woman who had been nothing but loyal, Isabella replied, and I realized that if he could do that to Sophia, he'll do worse to me. I've given him 28 years. I've buried my son and lost my daughter, and what do I have to show for it? Nothing. Less than nothing. Marco had studied her face for a long moment. If you're lying, if this is a trap, I'll kill you slowly. I know, Isabella said simply, but I'm not lying. I want out. And I want him to pay. Why not just divorce him? Take your money and leave? Isabella laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the empty church. You think it's that simple? You think he'd just let me walk away with what I know? I'm more trapped than you ever were. They had talked for an hour, and by the end an alliance had been formed. Isabella would be Marco's eyes and ears inside the mansion. She would weaken Salvatore, confuse him, make him vulnerable. And when the time came, she would ensure he was alone and unprotected. In exchange, Marco would help her disappear. New identity, new life, somewhere far from New York and the bloody legacy of the Marconi name. Now, 3 days after that meeting, Isabella was playing her part perfectly. The devoted wife, the concerned spouse, all while slowly poisoning the man she had once loved. That evening, Vincent the Knife came to the mansion for a meeting. He looked terrible, his face gaunt, his hands shaking. The fear had hollowed him out, carved away everything except survival instinct. He and Salvatore sat in the office with the door locked, speaking in low voices. We're down to 12 soldiers, Vincent reported. 12 out of 60. The rest are dead, missing, or they've run. We can't hold territory like this. The other families smell blood. Then we bring in outside help, Salvatore said. We have connections in Chicago, in Boston. We bring in soldiers who don't know the situation, who aren't afraid of ghosts. That takes time, boss, and money, and we need both right now. Salvatore slammed his fist on the desk. Then what do you suggest? That we surrender? That we offer ourselves up like sheep for slaughter? Vincent met his eyes. I suggest we find Marco Vitelli and end this. No more waiting, no more reacting. We hunt him down and kill him properly this time. And how do we find a ghost? We use bait, Vincent said. Something he wants, someone he cares about. His mother is already bait. She's out there somewhere, probably with him. Vincent leaned forward. Then we go public. We put word on the street that we're looking for an old woman named Sophia Vitelli. We offer money, protection, anything. We make enough noise that he has to respond. It was not a bad plan. Desperate, but not bad. Do it, Salvatore ordered. Put out the word tonight. After Vincent left, Isabella brought Salvatore his evening drink. Scotch, his favorite, mixed just the way he liked it. This time she had added a stronger dose of the oleander. She needed him weak for what was coming. He drank it without question, without suspicion, because after 28 years of marriage he trusted her completely. That night, as Salvatore lay in bed fighting off waves of nausea and vertigo, Isabella sat in her private sitting room and made a phone call to a number that couldn't be traced. It's done, she said when Marco answered. He's putting out word about your mother. He's trying to draw you into the open." "Let him try," Marco replied. "We're already exactly where we need to be." "When?" Isabella asked. "When does this end?" "Soon. Maybe tomorrow night. Be ready to move when I give the word." "I will be." She hung up and sat in the darkness of her room, listening to the sounds of the mansion settling around her. This house had been her prison for so long. Soon, it would be her husband's tomb. She felt no guilt, no remorse. She had mourned her marriage years ago, had buried it long before her son had been buried. What she felt now was cold satisfaction and the first taste of freedom. In the master bedroom, Salvatore dreamed of old women with white hair and sons with grey eyes. He dreamed of blood writing messages on walls and men vanishing into fog. He dreamed of his empire crumbling, of standing alone in the ruins while shadows closed in from all sides. He woke gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, his heart hammering. The clock beside his bed read 3 in the morning. The house was silent except for the wind rattling the windows. Salvatore got out of bed, his legs unsteady, and walked to the bathroom. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. His face was pale, almost grey. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a dying man. He splashed cold water on his face and tried to convince himself it was just stress, just fear, just the weight of everything pressing down. But deep in his bones, in that place where instinct lived, he knew the truth. He was being destroyed from within and without. Marco Vitelli was dismantling his family from the outside, and someone else, someone close, was poisoning him from the inside. He just didn't know who. Not yet. But in a few hours, when the sun rose on what would be the last day of his reign, he would learn the truth. And by then, it would be far too late to matter. In her room down the hall, Isabella lay awake, listening to her husband's movements, counting the hours until dawn. Soon, she thought, soon I'll be free. The mansion held its breath. The final act was about to begin. The end came on a Thursday in late December, 2 days before Christmas. Don Salvatore Marconi woke that morning to find the mansion empty. The guards who should have been at their posts were gone. The remaining soldiers who had promised to protect him had vanished in the night like smoke. Even the household staff had disappeared, leaving behind only silence and the echo of his footsteps on marble floors. He stood in the grand foyer, dressed in his robe, and called out. His voice bounced off the walls and returned to him, hollow and mocking. He was alone. The realization hit him like a physical blow. After 30 years of absolute power, of men jumping at his commands, of soldiers willing to die at his word, he stood utterly alone in his mansion. No family, no crew, no protection, just an old man in an empty house waiting for death to find him. Salvatore's hands shook as he poured himself a morning scotch. The bottle was nearly empty. He had been drinking more lately, trying to numb the fear and the sickness that had been eating at him for weeks. His reflection in the mirror behind the bar showed a ghost of the man he had been, pale, gaunt, hollow-eyed. He raised the glass to his lips, then stopped. What if it was poisoned? The thought paralyzed him. He set the glass down untouched and backed away from the bar. Everything was suspect now, every drink, every door, every shadow. He made his way upstairs to his office, his legs weak, and retrieved the gun from his desk drawer. A .45 caliber pistol, loaded, familiar weight in his hand. It was the same gun he had carried as a young soldier, back when he still did his own killing. With the gun in his hand, he felt slightly more in control, slightly less like prey. He would not die cowering. If Marco Vitelli wanted him dead, then let him come. Salvatore would face him like a man, like a don, and take at least one more soul to hell with him. The morning passed in agonizing slowness. Salvatore moved through the mansion room by room, checking windows and doors, seeing threats in every corner. The house that had been his castle now felt like a trap, its many rooms and hallways offering countless places for enemies to hide. Around noon, he found the first message. It was in the wine cellar, written in fresh blood on the stone wall, directly below the previous message that had said, "The debt comes due." This one read, "Today." Salvatore stared at the word, his heart hammering. Someone had been in the house while he slept. Someone had walked these halls, written this message, and left without him knowing. They were toying with him, making him understand how powerless he truly was. He climbed back upstairs, breathing hard, his chest tight. The poison Isabella had been feeding him had weakened his heart, though he still did not know she was responsible. He thought it was just age, just stress, just the accumulated weight of fear. In the kitchen, he found the second message. It was written on the refrigerator in what looked like lipstick. Isabella's lipstick, he realized, recognizing the expensive shade she wore. 8 years of waiting. 8 years. The time since he had ordered Marco Vitelli's death. The time Marco had spent in the shadows, watching, planning, preparing for this moment. Salvatore's mind raced. Where was Isabella? Why had she left her lipstick behind? Unless... The truth hit him like ice water. His wife of 28 years had betrayed him. The morning coffees she had brought him, the evening drinks mixed with such care, the concerned looks and gentle touches, all of it a lie, all of it poison. He wanted to scream, to rage, to destroy something. But there was no one to hear him, and nothing left to destroy. His empire was already ruins. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the gun heavy in his lap, and laughed. It was a broken, bitter sound, the laughter of a man who had finally understood the joke. He had spent his life accumulating power, crushing anyone who stood in his way, treating people like disposable tools, and in the end, those tools had risen up and cut him down. The old woman he had thrown into the snow, the soldier he had ordered killed, the wife he had ignored and humiliated for decades. He had created his own executioners. The afternoon light began to fade. The winter sun, weak and distant, sank toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened through the mansion's empty rooms. Salvatore sat in his office, the gun on the desk before him, and waited. They came as darkness fell. He heard the front door open, footsteps in the foyer. Multiple people moving with purpose, not bothering to hide their presence. Salvatore picked up the gun and stood. His legs were unsteady, but his hands were steady enough. Years of muscle memory took over. The footsteps climbed the stairs. He counted 3, maybe 4 sets. They were not rushing. They knew he was alone. They knew he was trapped. His office door opened. Marco Vitelli entered first. He was tall and lean, in his early 40s now, with dark hair going grey at the temples. His face was hard, carved by years of survival and vengeance. Across his throat ran a thick white scar where Vincent the Knife's bullet had grazed him 8 years ago, nearly killing him, but ultimately only making him stronger. His eyes were grey as winter ice. They held no anger, no rage, only cold certainty. Behind Marco came Sophia Vitelli, the old woman Salvatore had thrown into the snow 5 weeks ago. She looked even older now, bent and frail, but her milky eyes burned with fierce purpose. She leaned on a wooden cane, her gnarled hands trembling, but she stood upright, dignified. And behind Sophia came Isabella. Salvatore's wife stood in the doorway, wearing a long black coat and carrying a single suitcase. Her face was composed, calm. She looked at her husband without pity, without guilt, without anything at all. "Hello, Salvatore," she said. He raised the gun, pointing it at Marco. "You should have stayed dead." "I tried," Marco replied. His voice was rough like gravel. "Your man shot me, left me to bleed out, but my mother found me. She dragged me to a doctor who owed her a favor. She saved my life while your people searched the streets for my body." "Why wait 8 years?" Salvatore demanded. "If you wanted revenge, why wait so long?" "Because I wanted to do it right," Marco said simply. "I wanted to take everything from you, the way you took everything from me. My life, my future, my mother's dignity. I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose piece by piece, to watch your world crumble, to die slowly from the inside out." Salvatore's gun hand wavered. "I gave you everything. I brought you into the family. I made you a soldier. You made me a slave," Marco corrected. "You gave orders and expected absolute obedience. And when I refused to kill an innocent man, when I refused to cross that line, you had me executed. Not for betraying you, for having a conscience. In this life, conscience is weakness." "No," Sophia spoke up, her voice cracking but firm. "In this life, cruelty is weakness. You were so afraid of appearing soft that you became monstrous. You threw me away like garbage. After 32 years of service, after washing your clothes and cleaning your floors and staying invisible and silent, you threw me into the snow for a bet, for the amusement of men who feared you." Salvatore looked at the old woman and felt something twist in his chest. Not quite guilt, not quite shame, but something close. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "You made a choice," Sophia corrected. "You chose cruelty over mercy. You chose pride over humanity, and now you pay the price." Salvatore turned his gun toward Isabella. "And you? What's your excuse?" "I don't need an excuse," Isabella replied coldly. "I've been a prisoner in this house for 28 years. I watched you discard people like trash. I buried our son, I lost our daughter, And through it all, you never once saw me as anything more than decoration, a trophy wife, something to possess. I gave you everything. This house, money, jewels, respect. You gave me a cage, Isabella said, and when I saw you throw Sophia out, I realized that when I'm too old or too inconvenient, you'll do the same to me. So I chose to leave on my own terms. By poisoning me? She smiled, cold and satisfied. Just enough to weaken you, to fog your mind, to make you vulnerable. Marco did the rest. Salvatore's hand was shaking now. The gun felt impossibly heavy. So what now? You kill me? All three of you get your revenge, and then what? You think you'll be free? We already are, Marco said. He stepped forward, unafraid of the gun. Your empire is gone. Your soldiers are scattered or dead. The other families are already carving up your territory. And the police will find you here, dead by your own hand. Another old gangster who couldn't adapt to changing times. You think I'll kill myself? I think you don't have a choice, Marco said. You can die by my hand, which would be quick but meaningless. Or you can die by your own hand, which at least lets you pretend you had control until the very end. It was true, Salvatore realized. There was no escape, no last-minute rescue, no clever plan. This was the end. He looked at the three people standing before him. The soldier he had tried to kill, the servant he had discarded, the wife he had ignored, his three executioners come to watch him fall. I built an empire, he said quietly. You built a house of cards, Marco replied, and houses of cards always fall. Salvatore took a deep breath. His chest hurt. His head pounded. The poison in his system, the fear in his heart, the weight of everything crushing down. He was already dying. This was just making it official. He looked at Sophia. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sophia's milky eyes studied him. Sorry doesn't bring back the years. Sorry doesn't warm the nights I spent on the streets. Sorry is just a word old men say when they finally understand what they've done. She was right. Sorry meant nothing. He looked at Isabella. Were we ever happy? Even in the beginning? Maybe, she said, for a moment. But you loved power more than you ever loved me. Also true. He looked at Marco. If I had let you live, would you have been loyal? Yes, Marco said without hesitation. I would have followed you into hell, but you couldn't tolerate even the slightest defiance, and so you created your own enemy. Salvatore nodded slowly. He understood now. All of this, everything that had happened, was the inevitable result of his own choices. He had planted seeds of cruelty and reaped a harvest of vengeance. He lowered the gun. How do you want to find me? He asked Marco. In your office chair, gun in your hand, no signs of struggle. Make it look like you couldn't live with the loss of your empire. Salvatore almost laughed. It was perfect, really. The Don brought down not by rivals or police, but by his own despair. The newspapers would eat it up. Marco, Sophia, and Isabella turned to leave. Wait, Salvatore called out. They paused. My daughter, Lucia. Tell her I'm sorry I drove her away. Isabella's expression softened, just slightly. I'll tell her, though I doubt she'll care. They left him then, walking down the stairs and out of the mansion. Salvatore heard the front door close, heard a car engine start, heard the sound fade into the winter night. He was alone again. He sat in his office chair, the same chair where he had ruled his empire for 3 decades. The leather was worn, molded to his body, comfortable, familiar. He looked around the office, the expensive furniture, the paintings, the safe hidden behind the bookshelf, filled with cash that meant nothing now, all of it worthless. He thought about his life, the people he had hurt, the lives he had destroyed, the families he had torn apart. For what? Power, respect, fear. In the end, he had accumulated nothing but enemies. He raised the gun to his temple. His hand was steady now. Strange how calm he felt, like a weight had been lifted. He thought of Sophia shuffling through the snow. He thought of Marco, bleeding out in a warehouse. He thought of Isabella, trapped in a gilded cage. He thought of all the people who had the right to hate him, and he understood that justice delayed was not justice denied. It was just justice waiting for the right moment to strike. 8 years, he whispered to the empty room. You waited 8 years. Then Don Salvatore Marconi pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the empty mansion, then faded into silence. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the city in white, making everything clean and new. In a car heading toward the airport, Marco sat beside his mother while Isabella drove. They said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Behind them, the Marconi empire burned. figuratively, and in some neighborhoods where rivals moved quickly, literally. Sophia reached over and took her son's hand. Her grip was weak but warm. "It's over," she said. "It's over," Marco agreed. In the back seat, Isabella allowed herself to smile. For the first time in 28 years, she was free. The car disappeared into the winter night, carrying 3 people who had been victims and who had become something else. Not quite heroes, not quite villains, just survivors of a life that destroyed most people who touched it. Behind them, in a mansion on a hill, a man who had once ruled an empire sat dead in his office chair. His reign ended not by rivals or bullets, but by the simple arithmetic of cruelty. What you give, you receive. What you sow, you reap. What you throw away in the snow may return in the spring, transformed and terrible and just. Don Salvatore Marconi had learned this lesson too late, but he had learned it. And in the end, perhaps that was the only mercy he deserved. The snow fell. The city moved on. And in the morning when the police found the body, they would close the case quickly. Just another gangster, they would say, who couldn't live with his losses. They would never know the truth. But the truth didn't matter. Justice had been served. The debt had been paid in full. And somewhere in a city far from New York, 3 people began new lives, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes the powerless find power in patience. Sometimes the discarded become the reckoning, and sometimes winter returns to claim what cruelty planted in the snow. The end.